And in fact, you were saying that this proposal you were putting on the table was that it should be, unlimited money, which I think there are quite a few problems with, but that it should all be disclosed. And that was, in fact, formerly the conservative position on money in politics. William F. Buckley, George Will, famously all over saying it should be unlimited, but it should be entirely disclosed. And that was what the Supreme Court and Citizens United thought was going to be the case, was that all of this new money would be disclosed. They said disclosure requirements allow shareholders and the public to judge if this spending is in their interest and to determine whether candidates, the financial relationships between candidates and the elected officials and their financial supporters. And that is something that the American public really has a right to. And that, in fact, disclosure was so non-controversial. Scalia, in that Doe v. Reed case, said that requiring people to stand up in public for their political acts requires civic courage, without which democracy is dead.
Right. And so the proposal that Bernstein made, and again, it interested me because if the reality of the Supreme Court decisions is the money's going to be out there, and we are basically seeing unlimited money in politics right now, except it's taking different forms, that it's not directly going into Mitt Romney's campaign, but it's popping up in a 501c4, it's popping up in a super PAC, something like that. So if you really put that in the sunlight, it goes to the campaign directly. There's no fudging it. There's no cuteness. We know who you're giving to. We know who you are. And then we say there's also going to be public financing, because the other point he makes is, let's be honest, that the money gets more and more important the lower down the ballot you go. So if you have public financing and unlimited money, we're sort of acknowledging reality and we're trying to deal with it.
We should absolutely have public financing, and the kind that New York State may be about to adopt in terms of empowering small citizen donors, so that we encourage more people and more types of people to get involved in financially supporting their candidates and more active in the democratic system. But the point is that unlimited money directly to candidates is, of course, what we were seeing in Watergate, to candidates and outside of candidates. But that's why we have campaign contribution
Well, sure, but we didn't know where that. There were briefcases of cash going to the Nixon campaign. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about we have the name on the check.
There are states that do that,
right.
And it does happen. I think that, when it comes to Congress, though, you already have a situation where everybody has to start fundraising from day one. Even before day one, you have to start fundraising. And I wonder what would happen if you have unlimited donations. I mean, would there be any governance happening? I mean, I don't know. It's just a question. No. It is a solution, most definitely.
I think that's probably your best solution. I think that problem would probably be easier if you were able to connect with these broader groups that wanted to do this full time, wanted to organize this full time, and could funnel the money directly to you. I think that would alleviate some of what politicians have to do. On the disclosure thing, I know that it's consensus among the lawyers. I know that you guys think it's all a good idea, but the very issue there is that people who want to say things that don't agree with the consensus, or that are weird, or that are out there, fear the backlash that they're going to get, right? We see that, and you do see an increased polarity in American politics, and some of that is represented by actual crazy ideas that people have, and they want to express these crazy ideas, and they know they're crazy. And we can stand back and say, well, why do we need so many crazy ideas? But once you do that, now you're shutting off people who are innovators and different at all.
There's a relatively easy solution for that, which already exists in the law. I believe it was the Socialist Workers Party last month. The FEC, the Federal Election Commission, extended their exemption from having to disclose. So if you're a group that can come forward and say, look, here's the deal, we are so out of favor, we are so subject to harassment, to threats of violence, intimidation, that the disclosure of who we are, or who our donors are, or who our vendors are, would pose a risk to us, then there can be an opt-out procedure, and that courts have recognized that in other circumstances.
Absolutely, but other than that, criticizing people for taking a position in an election is not the same thing as chilling speech. That's just regular democratic accountability. So it's not the same thing to say, I disagree with this person's political spending, or, wow, that's an interesting message, but the fact that it's brought to me by this huge, powerful interest whose motives I might find a little suspect make me judge this message differently.
Well,
that's the whole purpose of disclosure.
And a lot of these ads are incredibly hateful. I mean, it's not, you can't look at these ads and say, oh, that brought up something I never thought about before. It brought up crazy.
But even if
Anthony Kennedy, in the Citizens United ruling, Anthony Kennedy basically made the point that it would be free speech checking free speech. That if you had companies engage, if corporations directly giving into the political system, the key was that their consumers, their shareholders would know about it, and would be able to use their free speech to sort of check the free speech of he saw it as sort of in his ruling, at least, he indicated sort of a free market thing.
And instead, what we're hearing is some of these speakers wanting to take the benefit of their new rights to speak directly to influence American voters, but without any of the accountability that we have in our political system that was set up. As you said, contributors to candidates are all disclosed, over $200 on the FEC website. You know, political action committees, when they spend money, when they're registered at 527s, they have to disclose their donors. People who play in politics have to disclose their donors. But now, because of these new avenues that the Supreme Court set up without realizing there weren't the appropriate disclosure provisions, we have had $300 million in dark money from C4, C5, and C6s, and that's really inappropriate, and we need to fix things in some pretty clear ways. Disclosure legislation, bright line legislation, the SEC rule, you know, which investors are demanding, and then obviously public financing at the end of that would be fantastic, but disclosure is really absolutely necessary.
Right, and I hate to play the lawyer here, but I am the one wearing a tie on Sunday morning. But there is a difference between playing in politics and playing in elections, and I think we need to be clear and precise here. No one is suggesting, or at least I don't think anyone is suggesting, that a group that wants to affect policy, that wants to lobby Congress for clean water, wants to lobby Congress for reasonable gun registration laws, immigration reform, should have to disclose their donors for doing that. The question is, what do you do on the portion where they're directly intervening in elections? And one of the things that I lament about what's happened now with the IRS is that there have been legitimate questions raised about some groups, particularly on the right, about whether or not they are abiding by these rules as they should be. And I think that what's happened with the fact that we now know the IRS itself didn't have an internal administrative mechanism for screening right from wrong, that gets lost in the shuffle.
I think, though, as an actual issue of public policy, it's just a lot more gray than that, because elections form this focal point for discussion about these policies. And if you look at a lot of the super PAC stuff, which people want to talk about a lot, and my biggest thing, and I think the research is supporting me, is that most of this is just not going to matter, because it's on elections, it's about candidates, but it's driven by people who have particular agendas, who mainly want to see an ad that reflects their viewpoint, right? And some of the ads just don't work at all. Like, they don't connect with the voters, they don't have any sort of impact. And the reason they don't have any sort of impact is because they were written to satisfy the donor, and what the donor wanted to say is, I hate this person for doing it, and I want everybody to know it. And that is a political free speech attempt.
I don't think
do you know
we
what
can
I mean?
make the argument
That's what they want to say.
Have no influence. I would hesitate to make that argument.
They have an influence. They have an influence inside the Beltway. I don't know that they actually change anybody's votes.
I think the big question is that super PACs at least acknowledge that they are political action committees and disclose their donors. What we have seen with some of these C4 groups is that they are applying to the IRS for C4 status. Their applications say, we are not going to spend any money on politics. A group that said, as they were mailing their application to the IRS, we were not spending any money on politics, was already up and running ads in Nevada and Florida in their Google.
So
this is an IRS law enforcement question where they're actually not subjecting enough groups to further review.
Well, and it is also so blurry, because Mark talks about the distinction between politics and elections, which I think is real and exists, but it also can be nebulous because we live in, Sidney Blumenthal called it 30 years ago, the age of the permanent campaign. But I put a couple.
That's why you need bright lines.
So we need bright lines. We need all sorts of reforms. Here's the question, though. With the scandals, I don't want to call it a scandal, but the stuff happening in Washington right now, is there going to be any chance of getting any reform at the IRS now that it's sort of, a problem agency? Let's talk about it when we come back. I just want to play what President Obama had to say about the IRS situation this week.
Across the board, everybody believes what happened as reported in the IG report is an outrage. The good news is it's fixable, and it's in everyone's best interest to work together to fix it. I'll do everything in my power to make sure nothing like this happens again. By holding the responsible parties accountable, by putting in place new checks and new safeguards, and going forward by making sure that the law is applied as it should be, in a fair and impartial way.
He's talking about reform there. Look, nobody trusted or liked the IRS before all of this. Now it's been tainted with, potentially, looking after groups on the right now thinks the IRS is really out to get them. And yet it's the IRS right now that's charged with overseeing these groups where all the money is sort of proliferating. Is it feasible that we're going to get any reform since the IRS is going to have to implement any of this reform?
At least people are talking about it. I mean, I feel like last year I was covering this subject the entire year, and a lot of times you just sort of felt like you were riding into this vacuum that nobody was paying attention to. In the last week, I feel like people at least know that there is such a thing as a 501c4, and they're talking about it. So maybe something can happen out of it, at least with the attention. At least we can be talking about it, and America can sort of realize all this anonymous money is going into the elections.
Yeah, and I think that this is something where, there are a lot of different elements to solve, the really unequal influence of money in politics that are somewhat more controversial or that have to be developed. This is a pretty simple, straightforward fix. First of all, it's getting the bureaucracy right. I mean, I think I'm absolutely serious.
Really?
Yeah, let's just do that. Let's just solve that. But look, I mean, what we're hearing about is, I go back to Keystone Cops instead of Big Brother. What we're hearing about is these,
but it could be Big Brother. We don't know yet.
It could be.
We don't know.
Oughtn't to, exactly. If it is, that's where it's absolutely proper that these investigations are being made. But I will say that when you read the IRS investigator report, you see that they referred to the team of specialists that was reviewing the C3 and C4 applications. It was one employee up until just very recently. So this poor person is overwhelmed as the C4 applications double between 2010 and after Citizens United in 2011. The point is, I think that, the Senate is now paying attention. We're going to be having hearings on this. I think we absolutely need to look at, the problem with the way these laws are being and regulations are being interpreted, the massive abuses that we've seen with the C4 form, and the fact that some of them report 87% of their spending in election spending to the FEC while still purportedly claiming to be C4 social welfare groups. So there's a lot to solve, but I think that a bright line rule would really do that, as well as actually comprehensive disclosure legislation, because that would disincentivize people from attempting to abuse these vehicles for dark money.
I'm just trying to picture the Congress that right now won't pass anything. Suddenly the Republican House passing something to empower the I can't see it right now. But anyway, I got to thank Liz Kennedy from the progressive think tank Demos, Mark Elias with the law firm Perkins Cooley. I said Cole. I'm an idiot. I'm sorry. And Kim Barker with the investigative website ProPublica. A building collapse in Bangladesh with political consequences here in the United States after this.